Hi guys, my name's Clarke Dudley and today I'm going to show you how to improve your black and grey surrealism style. The piece we're going to be working on is an abstract face design. During the process I'm going to go through how I saturate black, large fields of grey shading and crisp defined edges. I'll also be showing you how I line, shade and blend my tones to create my own distinct style. Enough about the piece, let's get into it. Quickly before we get started I'm going to run you through my workstation. If there's anything in this you want to purchase, there'll be a link in the description below. So for machines, we've got both the shader and the packer from Bishop, along with the Nuneaton batteries, best batteries I've used. A mixture of Quadrant and Stellar Peak 2.0 for cartridges and raw grey wash, along with a XXX Panthera black. Okay, that's everything I'm using, so let's get into the tattoo. So first thing I like to do is find somewhat of an unimportant part of the tattoo to work on, because first 10-15 minutes of what I'm doing is going to be feeling out the client's skin, seeing what works best for them, what kind of speed I can get away with as well. Yeah, so I'm near the wrist area at the moment, which is quite a tender spot, so start with that, get it out of the way. While I'm kind of feeling out the skin, I'm doing quite a light brushing technique, so I'm going just back and forth and then cross hatching as well. My technique for black and grey is usually quite slow, quite methodical, very much a back and forth motion. So the section I'm working on now is going to be just almost one consistent tone. So my technique for that is just a back and forth motion, almost like you're pulling a liner back and forth, but we're using a mag. Okay, so I've just finished this cross hatching technique down here. I've made the top a little bit more dense than the bottom just to give that fade off on this bottom section here. And now what I'm going to do is switch out to a round shader and just get those edges a little bit tighter. Not too tight because I want a more defined edge on this side, so I'll be using a liner for that one. So the edges on this side are kind of loose and abstract, so I'm using a round shader because it doesn't need to be perfect. I just need to define the edge slightly compared to other areas. It's not a spot where I want to have much of an out of focus look, hence why I'm just sharpening it up ever so slightly. As far as needle depth goes, it's sort of all about the feel. And that's something that my other hand's also doing. It's stretching, but it's also feeling for that, what we used to call like a bite point, not similar to a car. It's sort of, you can feel when you're in the right layer of skin. Bit of an old school approach to it, but it still works. I think when you're trying to get areas of consistent shade, consistent hand movement's the key, so there's no need to go any quicker or any slower depending on what you're doing. Yeah, so guys, I've just finished up this section here. Basically did exactly the same technique. I cross-hatched a lighter shade than I did on this section. I've just gone a little denser up here just to give you that fade off into a light tone. I'm going to start moving over to here now, which is one of the darkest areas of the piece. It's not quite black, but I'll be packing a dark grey like a black. So currently I'm on about 6.2 volts with the Bishop packer. I'm going to approach this bit exactly as I would a dark black area, but just with a dark grey. And how I do this is I usually come towards myself with the needle, I get a good stretch, and then I will do it like an elongated oval shape, nice and slow, not for too long, some at the wrist. As you can see, we're achieving a nice saturated area of dark grey. The reason I don't want to use black in this section is I want to save all my darkest blacks for the face, so I can give it as much contrast as possible. So earlier when I was testing out his skin, sort of figured out that this direction itself is quite good. So I'm just sort of sticking with that for packing. I mean, if I go up in a different direction, you can potentially see, yeah, it's not as dense as it would be if I was doing it the way I was doing it a minute ago. So I'm getting as close up to these very thin lines as I can in my stencil, just by using that same oval technique and then bringing my needles right down into the line. Knowing that I've got a curved mag, I'm not going to go over that line. As you can see, it's not exactly crisp, but I'll be going in with a liner later to fill that gap in. Now I'm softening into the liner. I've took that mag to that line as much as I can without closing that gap. So I'm going to use my liner, but I'm going to go one tone down from the dark grey that I've packed, because I don't like when you can see the line next to the grey. And then I'll push my liner in and away from me, and just tiny tight circles just to fill in those little areas that I've missed with the mag. Just trying to keep that little gap between the two shades. If there's still a bit missing, you can always add, you can't take away, so I tend to back off as much as I can and then go back into it if I need to. I prefer to do it this way around. I prefer to shade first and then crisp it up after, rather than put a full line in and then try and get up to the line. Okay guys, so I've just finished the next step, which is putting in one of my lightest areas in this chin. And I'm going to show you now how I go from my darkest area here into my lightest area, and I'll blend these two together. So once I've got the dark here and my light here, that means I'll go into my mid, and I'll just start brushing in the same way I would my light tone, back and forth, and just angling my machine up as I come out of the dark as well. And the reason I'm so slow and light with it is so I can make multiple passes over the same spot. Having the luxury of doing multiple passes means my blends can be so much softer. So I think you can see I've got this sort of pendulum motion going on. And that's just so when I go back over these lights, so when I go back over these light areas with this mid-tone, they're almost whipping into it. You can almost see here as well that there's a little bit of a discrepancy between the dark and the mid, but I'll go back over that with the darker if I need to. Same technique for everything, back and forth, and just build it up until you get that nice gradient of dark to light. So I've just finished packing all the black underneath the lip area, and what I'm going to do now is switch up my mag for a much smaller one, because I want to get a bit more tighter detail. These lips on this design are going to be a really important part of the piece, just because they're one of the very few focal points I've actually got. So I'm going to use much smaller mags, tighter liners, get as much detail as I can, and then the softer areas around it are really going to pull those forward as well, so it all goes hand in hand with each other. As I'm looking at it, I'd notice this area just above the black is exactly the same tone as here, so I'm going to keep that in mind going forward. And what I'll do is I'll brush a base layer of a medium tone through it, using the same back and forth technique as before. So this is going to be the main value of that section of the lip, and it means when I go and switch back to my liner, I'll then be using my liner to put all the texture in afterwards, giving it the detail. Exactly the same voltage as well, because I'm using this liner more in a shading manner. I don't need a really dense thick line, I just need some texture. So all the cracks in the lips, this is what I'm kind of adding now. And the reason I put that first layer in of a medium tone is so you don't see any skin coming through, saving those areas for the whites. Sort of simplifying everything as I go. I'm picking out all the tones, making sure they're all in the right places, and kind of detailing just however I want. When I talk about simplifying the realism aspect of it, I don't really tend to follow my reference as much. As long as the values are there, it's going to look realistic. Yeah, I think with surreal work, the detail's somewhat less important than the actual where your values are. So the way I do things with the layering the tone in first before I add any detail is I get a chance to be a bit more loose with the details. As long as your values are in there, you're going to look somewhat realistic. I think people sometimes take on a little bit too much, they bite off a little bit more than they can chew with detail, and they try and get every little detail in there and then lose themselves when it comes to tones and values. But if you work on those first and make the detail your second most important thing, then you'll end up with a much more appealing piece. So I'm going to continue putting all the tones and values into the lips, and then once I'm finished with that, and I'll start detailing and we'll take it from there. Right, so I've finished adding all my mid-tones to these lips, and as you can see they're taking shape quite well already, and this is literally just black and medium grey, and that is all I've done. I've put a little bit of detail in there earlier, but now I'm going to go and ahead and detail it with a liner, just to give you those cracks and definition in the lips. There's a lot of indents and cracks, so I'm going to maybe simplify it a little bit just so it doesn't look like chapped lips. Still want it to look good as a tattoo. And then I'm going to go underneath some of these highlighted areas that I'm leaving as skin for now, and just define those edges ever so slightly. Just tickling it in with the liner, to be fair. I don't want anything too dense. I don't want to take away from the actual value I've already put in. Using it almost as a shader. Not thinking about it as a liner, I'm just getting those really fine detailed cracks in there. Being quite loose with it as well. I'm not really following the reference that much. I'm just sort of feeling it out as I go. Trying as well to be mindful of what sort of direction these cracks would go on a lip in real life. Sort of follow that curve round back into the mouth as I go. Want some of these cracks more visible than others. I'll just sort of linger in the skin a tiny bit longer than I would on other sections. And then I'm going to do the same up here at the top section of the lip, just to define where these lip lines finish. I'm still using the liner as a shading, well, I'm still using this liner in a shading technique back and forth, but just to give that edge a bit of a definition on the reference, because this top lip's a little bit darker than the bottom. There's not a hell of a lot of detail you can actually see, other than the odd few cracks maybe. I feel like this top section, the highlight's really going to be where it sets, well, the highlight on this top lip's going to be really important for the overall look. So I'm going to make sure I leave that entire section alone until the end. So as you're probably able to see, we've jumped quite far ahead in the tattoo at this point, but that's only because my technique really hasn't changed moving from here to here. I thought it'd be worth noting that before I get into the jet black on these eyelashes, that I will be doing this big field of grey underneath. Only reason for that is, as I'm doing eyelashes or any dark areas, they tend to swell up a lot more, and I'll find it harder to put a light pigment underneath than I would to put a dark over the top. So that's the only reason I do that first. And we're just going to carry on doing the back and forth method, but just on a much larger scale really. I'd say my wrists doing a lot of the work at this point. When I'm doing these smaller pendulum motions, usually my thumb and forefinger would be doing a lot of the work, but my wrists kind of taking the brunt of this really. You might even be able to see my forearm is moving as well on the larger areas, just I'm trying to get as long a stroke as I can for a more consistent looking area of grey. Kind of wary to go back over myself a little bit at this point, just because I don't want patches of darker grey in random areas. I kind of want it to look as consistent as it possibly can. So the thing I'm trying to do here is this edge that I've defined, I don't want that darkness along the bottom, so I'll keep kind of gently cross hatching over the top just until it starts to blend into the large area of grey I've just put in. I'm not worried about going all the way up to this bottom edge of the eye here, because I know I'm going to be coming back over it with black, so it's not super important to go all the way up to the line at this point. Fine with these larger areas of grey, I'm rarely coming out of the skin, I'm still lingering in. Once I've sunk the needle in that first time, It's quite rare that it comes back out. And I'm quite happy with how this dark to light section looks. And bearing in mind that I'm bringing some eyelashes down into this as well, so like I said before, it doesn't need to, the grey doesn't need to fully extend to this line just yet. It's not important for me right now. Important thing is getting that large area filled with as consistent a grey tone as I can. So now I've finished that large area of grey, I want to get into the eyelashes. I've already packed the black around the eye just so I've got something to come off of, but I find when I'm doing eyelashes on this sort of size, I don't like to use a liner because it makes it quite cartoonish, so I'll just use the edge of a mag and I'll brush in the direction that I want the eyelashes to be. So kind of like this, I'll start packing the black ever so slightly, and then as I turn my mag, I'll come off in that direction. Because you'll find that in real life eyelashes tend to be kind of either in shadow or clumped together and going off in all sorts of directions, and you can't really achieve that effect with an outlining needle. Well, I can't anyway. So what I'm going to do is start putting in some very basic eyelash shapes with my 7 mag. What I'm also doing is giving a bit of separation between the eyelashes as well, so over time they don't bleed together too much. You want to still make out what they are, even years down the line. So I'm kind of going into it in the mindset that if on the reference they're quite close together, I'm just separating them ever so slightly. Now once I've got some of those basic eyelash shapes in, I'm going to go to a larger mag and maybe go a tone down, so I'm going to go back to a dark grey and just follow some of those lines again, but just whip it out, and that's going to sort of give it a little bit of a drop shadow underneath them and also make them not look too sharp as well. And you can bring those shadows as far down the cheeks as you want really, especially while a reference like this when you've got light sources all over the place. I'm just going to keep going with this technique until I look at it and I feel like I've done enough really. So as I'm getting up to this section, I've been consistently doing my back and forth motion in this area, but when we're crossing the crease of the arm here, it's getting more and more difficult to get any sort of smooth shading done. So something I'm going to do on this piece is just take a round shader and my light grey and just pack it as if it were black, knowing that when it heals and it all settles down, it'll be a nice smooth tone, because sometimes you just got to trust your shades and go for it. And even though it looks a lot darker when it first goes in, just I know how it heals, and it will heal for the same tone as it would if I was to put it in nice and softly in another part of the arm. So we're really starting to come together now. Once I've finished this section up near the crease of the arm, I'm going to be moving over to this slightly lighter section where the rest of this eye goes, and once we've got the eye done, we're going to head over to the eyebrow, so I do quite an interesting technique for that as well. Right, so I've worked our way through the eye now and we're heading towards the eyebrow. I've already packed all the black in that I need just underneath, and before I go ahead and do the brow, I'm going to do something similar to what I did before and kind of put almost an underlayer of a medium grey, just because when you see all the gaps between these eyebrow lines, you don't want any highlights kind of showing through, because naturally you wouldn't have any. So I'm just doing a very basic, quick layer of a medium grey, just in the direction where these eyebrows are going to go. You kind of need a really good stencil for this, and I tend to use the Proton stencil fluid, which is also available at Killer Ink. And once that is in, I'm going to take a big mag, and working from where I packed the black earlier, just kind of go in curved lines. I wouldn't use a liner for this, like I said before, because the outcome's kind of cartoonish if you use an outline. But a mag needle, kind of, it's imperfect, and that's what eyebrows tend to be on real people. You just keep following that direction. Like I say with the mag look, some will turn out thick, some are thin. If you want any denser areas, you can just go over again. You're going to want to keep some distance between some of these lines just for longevity reasons. You don't want a huge black slug of an eyebrow 5 years down the line, so it's a good idea to keep a little bit of skin in between. Hence why I put the layer of medium underneath, so it doesn't look as much of a highlight rather than a different tone instead. And then the eyebrows just starting to come together. If there's any that look a little bit too spaced apart, just maybe get the very corner of the mag and put a really fine line in between there. And then what you'll see as well, usually on a brow, is that the majority of the hairs will be going in one direction, and as it gets towards the middle of the brow it sort of curves off into the opposite direction, so don't forget to do that. So once this is done, I'm just going to go back into the very top of here, which is another just area of like a lighter to mid grey, and maybe I'll be back in then to put some texture throughout the rest of the piece before we end up doing the highlights. Right, so we're getting close to the end of the tattoo now. We've done all the greys we need to do. I also went through and tightened up a few of the edges as well. With the highlights, I tend to be a bit more all over the place, and because I don't consider my style fully photorealism, I like to exaggerate the highlights quite a lot, and it just really gives that features that you want to draw attention to pop really far forward. Right, let's get started with the lips first. So the white highlights tend to be a little bit more painful for the clients. I guess at this point you want to make every movement with your needle count. You don't want to be having to go over things over and over again. So right now I'm kind of just lingering in the skin a little bit. Do all of this with a 5-liner as well. Even in these large areas of white, I'm not really dragging the needle through the skin that much. I'm kind of sinking in and doing clusters of dots, but lingering a little while just to make sure the white's as dense in that area as I can get it. This is something I like to revert back to my reference to, just because I've already pre-planned how I want the highlights to look, because you can always overdo it, so it's pretty important to me to test it out and procreate first. Obviously, being the last thing I do, I wouldn't want to put these in, overdo it, and then it ruin the whole piece after all that hard work. So because I use quite a lot of abstract shapes in the designs that I'm doing, a lot of things in the piece can really compete for your attention, so wherever I'm putting the highlights is really going to draw the viewer's eye in, and I like to exaggerate that so you really know what to look for in the piece. I wouldn't tend to add highlights into an area where there naturally wouldn't be any, so when I talk about exaggerating, I'm talking about exaggerating what is already there and using it as probably more of a baseline to get a bit loose with it and create something of your own. So we're coming to the last little bits now. I'm just adding some small speckles across the top of the eye, trying not to overdo it. Like I said before, I really don't want to take away from that natural look, but at the same time it's just a little bit exaggerated, just so it really draws your eye into where I want you to be looking. Just a few final touches and we're almost there, so we'll be back with you to check out the final piece. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something new today. If you'd like to check out more of my work, follow me at Clarke Tattoo Art on Instagram, or look for 122 Tattoo Club on Google. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Killer Ink's YouTube channel. Catch you later.